Hello everyone, Clifford Bennett, Chief Economist, ACY Securities. Now, I've never wanted to be more wrong than I am in this video, because unfortunately in this video I have to speak to the increasing risk of things deteriorating further with regard to the Ukraine conflict. Now, it's very difficult to work out, given the overwhelming sea of propaganda and spin that's occurring from both points of view and from third-party points of view, exactly the reality here. And there are arguments to and fro. And I'm not taking a side, and I'm not suggesting anything is okay. All I'm trying to do is ascertain what is most likely to happen, what is happening, without a perspective or judgment on that. And I think that's very important, and it always is in the trading and investing in financial markets, to figure out what's really going on, to avoid thinking about what we want to have happen. Now, what we all want to have happen here is for a resolution. Some want a complete withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine, some don't. But for the moment, I think I do need to focus on what does appear to actually be happening. And at this point in time, I'm going off the joining of some dots. The dots are that reportedly, and again, there's a big caveat on all of this, it's just what's being reported and trying to find what's essentially correct. But I may be wrong. Some of the things I'm saying may actually be wrong. It's very difficult to know. It appears, and it's being reported, that the Polish foreign minister has congratulated the US on blowing up the pipeline, the Nord 2, that Blinken was caught on camera boasting about blowing up the pipeline, that Biden is on camera as having said, even when he was cross-questioned about it, that the United States would end Nord Stream 2, perhaps Nord Stream 1, should Russia invade Ukraine. The Danish Navy is reporting that US helicopters, military helicopters, were seen in the area. So the dots there don't look good for the United States. One might argue it's a clever strategy, geopolitical strategy, geomilitary strategy. But again, I'm not laying any judgment. I'm just saying some facts here. So it does appear that it's more likely than not that the US was involved, and perhaps with the assistance of the UK. We also have Poland apparently shifting its rhetoric to wanting to go into conflict with Russia. That's concerning. Again, I could be wrong. We have reports that US generals have been on the ground in Ukraine for some time and in fact designed the recent counteroffensives. There could be a stronger US military presence already in Ukraine than any of us are aware of, and we already know it's quite significant. Putin has warned several times, and and I'm not talking about the nuclear side, he's warned several times that the introduction of long-range missile systems into Ukraine by NATO, by the US, would be a red line, and a direct act of war by NATO, including the US, against Russia, and would require a response. So far, President Biden, who at the time promised Putin that would never happen, this is before the war started, President Putin so far hasn't allowed that to occur. Some US generals are pushing for it. The risk there is, a lot of people in the world want Ukraine to win the war, but we do not want World War III. This is why I'm raising these issues. The other thing is that while Poland's becoming more aggressive in what it wants to do, Germany seems to be becoming more reticent. There are reports the German government is backpedaling on the promise to send more tanks to Ukraine and is currently holding up a shipment there. Again, all of this Who knows what the truth is? I'm trying to figure it out for you. The other thing that worries me is this idea in the United States, and also what's interesting is some US television stations are for the first time beginning to openly suggest that the US itself is getting this wrong. Where is that coming from? Are there undercurrents and talks in the background that journalists are picking up on that is worrying them? There seems to be a feeling amongst the people who want to go hard against Ukraine in the United States that this war is definitely winnable, and that may or may not be the case. My point is they believe it could be or is. And some of those people also believe they could do with Russia what they have already done with Ukraine. Remember, the United States was in back of the overthrow of a democratically elected government in Ukraine in 2014 that was pro-Russia. And since then, governments have been pro-West. So they may be seeing, yes, there's a price to pay in Ukraine, by Ukraine. Perhaps we can have some sort of heightened conflict with Russia. And given that Russia's been losing some ground against Ukrainian forces, perhaps we'll do better than we previously thought. And perhaps it will provoke some kind of internal turmoil and revolution within Russia. Now, if key decision makers in the United States are thinking that way, I think they're badly mistaken, but that's just a personal opinion. And I think it's extremely dangerous. Now, Putin is aware that he cannot use tactical nuclear weapons. Therefore, the only way to use them is to say, I will, to threaten to do so, as a kind of dampener on the response he's getting back. All of this is all very complex, and it's different parties trying to read between the lines, the tea leaves, as I'm doing now, to get it right in terms of the best way forward. What is disappointing is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of impetus towards how can we get a demilitarization of the situation for a more diplomatic resolution. There only seems to be a heightened feeling of let's get more militarized here by NATO, the US in particular. That's a dangerous setup. So as I started with this, I hope I am wrong, but I do, if I'm going to look after you and your position to the best of my humble ability, is to suggest to you that an expansion of the war, which I thought was never possible, is in fact now slightly possible. That may hopefully be limited only to skirmishes on the Polish border. The extent of the expansion of the war could be to a point of skirmishes on the Polish border, unfortunately. I hope not, I pray not. And NATO forces more actively, obviously involved in Ukraine. Now, the Russians already believe they are fighting NATO because of the training, the expertise that's been sent in, the on-the-ground existence of US generals, and obviously all the equipment that's flowing in. If the US tries to introduce those long-range missiles into Ukraine, we are likely to see advanced Russian bombers and missiles seek to take out those missile systems before they can be set up in the field. A control center for that missile system is at Ramstadt Air Base in Germany, so we would hope that that would not be targeted. This is a very important thing. These missile systems, if they go into Ukraine, will be great for the Ukraine from a military point of view, but may not be so great for the rest of the world from a global stabilization point of view. The other thing, of course, is that Zelensky's signed a request for a speedy membership to NATO. NATO has received that. I don't think NATO is going to accept that at this point. If NATO accepts that at this point, that means Ukraine becomes immediately part of NATO, that will not mean that Russian forces leave Ukraine. That will not be the Russian response. So the NATO response will have to be Article 5. If one of its members are under attack, they all get involved. It will mean the start of an all-out European war. So, while a lot of people want to support Ukraine, if Ukraine becomes a member of NATO now, we almost certainly have an expanded European war immediately. I don't think anyone wants to see that, so we'll see how that plays out. But I think as an investor and a trader, you need to be aware of how there are pressures building in the direction of stupid moves that will not be good for anyone except some theoretical tactician sitting back in London or Washington playing war games on a computer screen. The reality on the ground for Europe, for the people of Ukraine, especially for Russia too, for those European neighboring nations, will not be good. The other thing to consider as a trader and investor is that even if the things I've just said to you become more commonly spoken of, a wide range of investors become more aware of the increasing unfortunate reality of these risk scenarios, then that alone will impact market price action. All of that aside, I see the current equity market rally in the US as a gift horse opportunity. You should not look in the mouth, but actually sell. I myself have been selling a little bit of equities today. I've again sold euro and I've again sold Aussie. I'm long gold and I'm buying more gold. An interesting proposition is to hedge our livelihoods almost. Because the consumer and business spending retrenchment that would occur on any heightened war in Europe at this point would be severe. That means recessions all across the West, instantly. Europe, US, Australia. Less so, China, Asia. But for Western equity markets, those three that I mentioned, very bearish indeed. However, the market that could really skyrocket, well, there's two, gold and black gold. I'm buying more oil at the moment because if I buy oil here and I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, and in fact, the number one thing we should all be doing before we do anything in financial markets, we should all be sitting down and saying a prayer that none of this actually continues to build in the direction that it is currently building in, sadly. Let's say a prayer that somehow we get out of this, right? Now, I don't think we're going to have a global war, but we could have these heightened situations, NATO troops fighting in Ukraine, particularly the Polish border to me could be a flashpoint because the Poles seem so willing and keen. They plan to have a bigger tank force than Russia, the biggest tank force in all of Europe. But that isn't achieved as yet, but they've been moving in that direction. And you can understand that Polish response. It's been one of the countries that's been most sacked by war in the last century and a half. So there is justifications there for the Poles acting in the way they are. Now, coming back to all of that, I'm not seeing a world war, but I'm seeing a European war possibility, expansion, as described. That will drive gold and oil way up through the roof. That will mean US inflation is 12, 15, 16%. Recent pricing pressures, if you look into the detail, inflation was holding up when gasoline prices were dropping 15, 16, 17%. that means there's broad-based undercurrent of inflation in the US economy. If oil prices begin to move back up, and I've been saying to buy them for the last 2 weeks after getting it badly wrong previously, and it's working again. If oil prices continue to move up, inflation in the US is set to really kick that in very quickly. So inflation back above 10% in the US, or it didn't quite get there almost, that was my target I set early on, but inflation above 10%, maybe 12, 15, 16% in the United States, if there is a war, in a heightened expansion of the war in any shape or moderate form, is a very real possibility. So what I'm saying is to hedge a lot of your other investment portfolio, it may be worth buying some gold and oil. If I'm wrong, you'll lose money on your gold and oil hedges, but the rest of your life and your investment portfolio will survive. So it's a reasonably interesting hedging proposition. I think that's about all from me at the moment, except to say that a couple of days ago, the US manufacturing PMI, manufacturing in the US is just collapsing. It's probably heading back to COVID lockdown type levels. US economy is by no means strong. I watched with interest and detail Jerome Powell's most recent press conference, and in his own words, he said that what the Fed is doing will lead to below trend economic growth, will lead to a worsening of the labor market, but they are things that have to happen as he focuses on fighting inflation. So the chairman has said he will keep raising interest rates aggressively even as the US economy begins to tank and people lose jobs. So for all of those who are thinking, oh, bad economic data is good for the stock market, no, it just means earnings are going to be lower and they're going to be further savaged by ever higher Fed rate hikes. The outlook for the global economy is the worst I have seen in my 38 years now. And I really do think people should be highly active in their trading and investing at the moment, because standing back and hoping that markets will go up because of some entirely false premise that markets always go up eventually. I mean, in 1929, you might have had to wait 25 years for some markets to get back to the same level. Don't be head in the sand over this. I think keep an eye on gold and oil. Keep an eye on a US dollar being resurgent. And that means euro, Aussie dollar weakness. You know, my further outlook risk for the Australian dollar is 58 cents. And my further euro outlook is perhaps 88 cents. So the yen is problematic and difficult at this stage. There's some good price action ranges there that you should keep an eye on. The recent range of the past 1 to 2 weeks, I would tend to respect a break either side of that. So I hope I've been wrong in my highlighting the increased risk factors surrounding the Ukraine conflict, but I really thought you needed to hear this, even if you didn't like hearing it and I didn't like saying it. So I wish you the very best for the most of your day and look after that investment portfolio of yours. Clifford Bennett, Chief Economist, ACY Securities.